Ed Wood is notorious worldwide as the so-called worst filmmaker of all time. He has been laughed at, ridiculed, and ostracized. But can he really be the worst filmmaker of all time when his movies have lived so long in the memory of his fans? Wood was no grand artiste, that much is true, but his unique vision and relentless commitment to eccentric and independent films have inspired many others in the movie industry, including David Lynch, Johnny Depp, and Tim Burton. However, the eccentricities did not stop with the movies themselves. Wood was a true oddball, both charming and disturbed at times. He was haunted by his own demons, and his life ended in miserable circumstances. Broke, forgotten, and discovered contorted in a death pose that would not have been out of place in one of his films. We are looking at Ed Wood's incredible career and also the tragic, dark side of his later life that Tim Burton didn't tell you about. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Ed Wood was born Edward Davis Wood, Jr. in 1924 in Poughkeepsie, New York. His father, Edward Wood, Sr., worked as a custodian for the U.S. Postal Service. He had lived in various parts of the country before settling in Poughkeepsie with his wife Lillian so they could start a family. From a young age, Ed was passionate about comic books, pulp magazines, the occult, and movies. Growing up in the 1930s, he lived through a golden age for these things. Above all else, he was crazy about the early Universal horror films such as Dracula by Todd Browning and Frankenstein by James Whale, both released in 1931. Other films that thrilled him included The Mummy by Karl Freund, released in 1932, and The Black Cat by Edgar G. Ulmer in 1934. Wood even aspired to remake The Black Cat as Dr. Voodoo in 1954, intending to cast original stars Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, although this was one of his many failed projects. The B-westerns of that time also were a major influence on his filmmaking life. His early idols included Buck Jones, the real-life cowboy who became a movie star. Ed frequently skipped school to watch movies at the local theater, where he would salvage discarded stills to add to his growing collection. At a time when entire movies were often trashed once their run was complete, Wood was ahead of his time in recognizing the collectability and cultural importance of movie memorabilia. Meanwhile, he was experiencing other struggles, which would also have an effect on his later life. A long-standing rumor suggests that his mother dressed him in girls' clothes until he was 12, as she had badly wanted a daughter but wound up with 2 sons. This allegedly contributed to his later habit of wearing women's clothing, a claim that was made by his second wife, Kathy O'Hara. While Wood's fascination with cross-dressing likely involved many complex factors, he developed a lifelong obsession with the texture of Angora that his mother dressed him in. Wearing girls' Angora sweaters and dresses was considered highly unconventional for boys in the 1920s and 30s, to say the least. On his 12th birthday in 1936, Wood received his first movie camera, a Kodak Cine Special. One of his earliest films captured the airship Hindenburg, flying over the Hudson River at Poughkeepsie just minutes before its tragic crash at Lakehurst, New Jersey. One of Wood's first jobs was, naturally, as a cinema usher. He also sang and played drums in a band. Later, he formed a quartet called Eddie Wood's Little Splinters, where he sang and played various stringed instruments. In 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and the USA entered World War II, Ed was 17 and a prime target for the draft. He was drafted by the United States Marine Corps the following year and served in the South and Central Pacific. During the war, he participated in combat in the Marshall Islands and Noumea and was a survivor of the Battle of Tarawa, which left more than 3,000 GIs killed or wounded in just 72 hours. He claimed that a Japanese soldier's rifle butt knocked out most of his front teeth during this battle. However, his military records tell a different story. They show that he mainly recovered bodies on Baishio and endured Japanese bombing raids on Baishio and the Ellis Islands. Navy dentists extracted his damaged teeth over several months, unrelated to any combat injuries. After this, Wood had false teeth and would later make his wife Kathy laugh by slipping them out and showing a toothless grin. Wood also claimed he served as an intelligence agent in the South Pacific until he was shot in the leg and developed a recurring filariasis infection, which confined him to office duty. There he learned to use a typewriter, a skill that would be useful later in his life. But there was something else going on that, according to him, caused him more battle anxiety than Japanese bullets. His tough guy image contrasted with his claim that he often wore bras and panties under his uniform during battle. Although he admitted this story might be an exaggeration, it has nonetheless become legendary. He once said he feared being wounded more than being killed because he didn't want a medic to find him in pink lingerie during the Battle of Tarawa. After World War II, Wood briefly studied dramatic arts in Washington, D.C. However, he was soon drawn to some rather less noble forms of performing arts when he toured the country with a traveling freak show. He performed as a carnival geek who bit the heads off live chickens on stage, and later as the half-man, half-woman, a character who looked like a woman on one side of his body and a man on the other, a role that probably suited his unique tastes quite nicely. Wood moved to Hollywood in 1947. His boundless enthusiasm and handsome matinee looks quickly landed him acting roles in various stage productions. During this period, he also made around 125 commercials for story ad films and approximately 30 for play ad films, along with a few for Pie Quick. In 1948, Wood directed his first short film, Crossroads of Laredo, a Western starring Duke Moore. The movie was shot silently with plans to add music, sound effects, and dialogue later, but it was never completed during Wood's lifetime. The producer, John Crawford Thomas, whom Wood had persuaded to finance the film with his parents' money, ran out of funds, and Wood went AWOL. Wood had filmed and edited all the footage, but there was no money left for dubbing. For years, Thomas was left with a silent Ed Wood film. Finally, in 1995, Thomas and former Wood actress, girlfriend, and protege, Dolores Fuller, found backers to dub the film. The result was, at best, mixed, but it brought Wood's early work to light, and it's not like even Wood's most ardent fans were expecting a low-budget recut and dubbing of his first film would turn it into Citizen Kane anyway. In either version, the film itself certainly shows its limitations. It was made extremely cheaply, with low-quality outdoor sets and minimal reshoots. In one scene when a loose horse wanders between two men dueling, they simply step around the animal and carry on fighting, rather than stop to reshoot the scene or try to remove the horse. This could be seen as a touch of realism if you are inclined to use your imagination, but to most moviegoers it looked a little ridiculous. To be fair, many independently produced B-westerns of the 1930s and 1940s, including those by smaller studios like Monogram and PRC, shared Crossroads of Laredo's low-budget look. So Wood was not exactly alone in this. Despite Crossroads of Laredo not being released, Wood didn't let this setback stop him. In 1948, he formed his own drama group and staged The Casual Company, a play he wrote about the Marine Corps. Unfortunately, the play closed after only 1 week due to poor reception. However, other theater work helped sustain him over the next couple of years. For example, in 1949, Wood and Thomas acted together in a play called The Blackguard Returns at the Gateway Theater. Wood joined the Screen Actors Guild in 1951 and briefly worked as a stuntman among other roles. He wrote under various pen names, including Angora, a nod to his favorite textile Angora, and Actov Telmig, a backward spelling of his favorite drink, the vodka gimlet. In 1950, Ed Wood began working as a stuntman on Sam Fuller's The Baron of Arizona, a job that, to his great surprise, actually required him to wear women's clothes most of the time. After this, in 1951, Wood directed his first completed movie, The Sun Was Setting, a half-hour TV drama about a dying woman who wants to see Chinatown one last time. The film starred Angela Stevens, Tom Keane, and Phyllis Coates, but it was far from memorable. The following year, Ed co-wrote the western The Lawless Rider with the film's star, veteran cowboy Johnny Carpenter. Johnny Carpenter would later appear in Wood's Night of the Ghouls from 1958. During this period, Wood was introduced to actor Bela Lugosi by his friend and fellow writer-producer Alex Gordon, who was Wood's roommate and later helped create American International Pictures. Wood and Lugosi would become firm friends and form a creative partnership. Lugosi's son, Bela Lugosi Jr., felt that Wood exploited his father's fame, taking advantage of the aging actor when he was financially desperate. However, many documents and interviews with Wood's associates in the excellent book, Nightmare of Ecstasy, suggest that Wood and Lugosi were genuine friends. Wood reportedly helped Lugosi through severe clinical depression and drug addiction. He also helped Lugosi with stage and TV appearances, serving as a director, dialogue coach, errand boy, or whatever Lugosi needed, which hardly seems exploitative. Lugosi had become addicted to morphine to manage his debilitating sciatica, and was also struggling mentally due to a recent divorce and impending old age, and it was his drug use that ended his acting career long before he encountered Ed Wood. In late 1952, Wood also met actress and songwriter Dolores Fuller, who was in the process of divorcing her first husband, Donald Fuller. Wood and Fuller shared an apartment for 3 years, and he cast her in 3 of his films during that time. She was his first real muse, and some of her roles would be among the most iconic performances in any of Wood's films. In 1953, Wood released his first classic cult film, Glen or Glenda. This movie tried to capitalize on the recent sex change operation of Christine Jorgensen, an ex-GI who became a glamour girl, which was big news back then. However, it was also Wood's most personal film. The story centers on a transvestite played by Wood himself, under the alias Danielle Davis, whose girlfriend, played by Fuller, has to accept his cross-dressing. A secondary storyline about a man undergoing a sex change was also thrown in at the last minute. What could have been a dull drama filled with fake psychology became in Wood's hands a bizarre piece of cheap and corny surrealism. Wood even managed to include the devil, and naturally Bela Lugosi, who played a godlike scientist/puppeteer in the film. At home, Wood took Fuller's enthusiasm for Glen or Glenda as a sign of her open-mindedness about transvestism. He confessed to her that he was also a transvestite, just like his character in the film. Fuller was shocked and appalled by this revelation and considered ending their relationship. However, Wood managed to persuade her to stay with promises of better roles in the future. Glen or Glenda also featured Conrad Brooks in his first Ed Wood film. Brooks played several minor roles in the movie and went on to appear in every Ed Wood feature until The Sinister Urge in 1961. In later years, particularly from the mid-1980s onwards, Brooks became a cult figure in the independent film scene, largely due to his association with Wood. Glen or Glenda was produced by George Weiss, a young, small-time producer with a few films to his name, including the intriguingly titled Test Tube Babies from 1948. Weiss would go on to produce numerous exploitation films, such as Keyhole Varieties, Nudist Life, White Slaves of Chinatown, and Olga's House of Shame. It is pretty clear that Weiss was more interested in the sensational aspects of subject matter rather than a nuanced portrayal of a transvestite, but he gave Wood plenty of creative freedom. Although it is unclear what Weiss personally thought of the final film, he was primarily a businessman. As long as a film could be made quickly and cheaply and then sold, it was acceptable to him. Principal shooting for Glen or Glenda took only 5 days. Upon its release, Glen or Glenda barely broke even, in spite of the minuscule budget. The subject matter was too ahead of its time. Even with the public interest in Christine Jorgensen, it wasn't until much later that the film gained a following among fans of the bizarre. These enthusiasts appreciated the film for what it was, a far-out expose on what was a still obscure subject in the 80s and 90s. Their support ensured that the film was released and re-released on video and DVD, and was even played on TV and in theaters. The same year as Glen or Glenda, Wood also made Crossroad Avenger, The Adventures of the Tucson Kid, a half-hour pilot for a TV series that was never realized. According to Wood, Crossroad Avenger was passed over in favor of Wild Bill Hickok, starring Guy Madison. It is worth noting that Western TV series were in high demand in the early 1950s, unlike today. If you wanted to sell a TV series back then, it had better be a Western. However, the downside was that the market was oversaturated with Westerns. making it difficult for new pilots to turn into series unless they had something truly special. Ed Wood's pilot, Crossroad Avenger, was not poorly made. It was competently executed for its time, but did not stand out unlike many of Wood's other films. This pilot was not destined to become the Plan 9 of cheap TV westerns. In 1954, Ed Wood collaborated with his friend Alex Gordon, the executive producer of The Lawless Rider, and later a producer with American International Pictures. Together they co-wrote Jailbait, a film noir. Wood found himself somewhat out of his element with the film noir genre. The gritty realism typical of noir was at odds with Wood's penchant for fantasy, pulp fiction elements, transvestites, and horror and sci-fi motifs. Jailbait, about a killer forcing a plastic surgeon to give him a new face, contains some gruesome details characteristic of Wood, but overall it lacks his usual over-the-top style. Instead, it resembles the police TV series Dragnet. The film was, as always, shot quickly and cheaply in just 4 days, and it shows. Wood spent much of his time setting up the camera, leaving little opportunity to direct the actors. This is evident in Steve Reeves' stiff and insecure performance as a cop. Reeves, who was Mr. Universe 1950 and a first-time actor, would later achieve fame as Italy's first Hercules 4 years later. Other actors in Jailbait included Dolores Fuller as the heroine, veteran actor and Wood's friend Lyle Talbot as the inspector, and silent screen star turned character actor Herbert Rawlinson as the plastic surgeon. Originally, Lugosi was intended for Rawlinson's role, but he had to decline due to other commitments. Rawlinson allegedly died the night after his final day of shooting Jailbait. In 1954, Wood signed on a costume designer named LaTanya Griffin, better known as simply LaTanya. This was quite a coup for Edward D. Wood Productions, as LaTanya was famous for her stunning gowns which had been purchased by stars like Joan Crawford and Dorothy Dandridge. She was also the first black woman ever signed by a major Hollywood studio as a costume designer. And at the time she met Wood, she was recovering from a truly shocking event involving her ex-husband. If you'd like the full scoop on LaTanya's incredible life, head over to Patreon or our members area on YouTube, where we have a Hollywood Histories essay all about her coming up. She and Ed Wood would work together on almost 24 films, including some of his most extraordinary costumes. Alex Gordon, who co-wrote Jailbait with Ed Wood and shared an apartment with him at the time, gave Wood the idea for his next feature. This project turned out to be one of Wood's most memorable and infamous films, Bride of the Monster. Bride of the Monster was ambitious for Wood, requiring elaborate sets, especially a futuristic laboratory, and advanced special effects. The plot involved a man growing into a giant and fighting a giant squid. This necessitated a higher budget than usual. It also needed a strong actor like Bela Lugosi to play the villain. Fortunately, Wood managed to secure Lugosi for the role of the mad scientist. The rest of the production was typical Ed Wood improvisation. Lugosi's character hides in an abandoned house in the swamps, guarded by his strongman Lobo, and a giant squid, which really looked more like an octopus. The scientist conducts experiments to create a race of giants. However, an Eastern European spy and a curious female reporter, played by Loretta King, discover his hideout. The scientist feeds the spy to the squid and straps the reporter to a bed, planning to use his supergrowth rays on her. Lobo, who has fallen in love with the reporter, rebels against the scientist. During their fight, the scientist is exposed to his own rays, becomes a giant, and kills Lobo. Eventually, the police arrive and the scientist meets his end in the tentacles of his own giant squid. The synopsis alone sounds campy, but the way Wood brought it to life is what makes the film entertaining. Unable to afford a set designer or proper props, Wood used anything that looked remotely technical as a backdrop for the laboratory set. Instead of red brick walls, he used some very unconvincing brick wallpaper. The special effects were even worse. When the scientist becomes a giant, he merely dons platform shoes, adding only a few inches to his height. The climactic squid fight is equally laughable, with Lugosi flailing around, struggling to make the rubber tentacles appear lifelike as he sits in a puddle. Of course, this became one of the most memorable scenes in the Burton film, as we see the wild escapade where the gang breaks in and steals the rubber squid from the studio lot. Wood always claimed this was how it played out, but in truth they merely rented the creature cheaply. It wasn't of any particular value or interest to anyone other than Wood, that is. But even if the story is embellished, it does reflect his endless creativity and determination to make movies any which way he could. Despite these shortcomings, the film is incredibly amusing. The amateurish special effects and sets add to its endless charm. One can't help but appreciate Wood's ambition and his belief that he was creating something more than just a drive-in sci-fi flick. The only aspect of Bride of the Monster that might fail to raise a laugh is its actual comic relief character, Kelton the cop, played by Paul Marco. Kelton is an inept policeman who finds himself in various slapstick situations. Despite the awkward comedy, there's something endearing about his character. Later, Paul Marco reprised his role as Kelton the cop in the 2005 film The Naked Monster. Shortly after completing Bride of the Monster, Wood and Fuller ended their relationship. Although she had a minor role in the film, their breakup was allegedly due to Fuller's inability to accept Wood's cross-dressing. Wood's growing alcoholism and his decision to reduce Fuller's role in favor of newcomer Loretta King contributed to their split. Fuller herself admitted, "I'm a very normal person. It's hard for me to deviate. I wanted a man that was all man." Following their breakup, Fuller left acting, which might have been for the best. Although not a strong actress, she was a talented songwriter. She eventually found success in music, writing hit songs for artists like Elvis Presley, Nat King Cole, and Peggy Lee. Ironically, Fuller is now more famous for her association with Ed Wood than for her successful music career. Around the same time, Wood also parted ways with his friend and frequent collaborator, Alex Gordon. Gordon had begun producing for AIP thanks to his friendship with the company's co-president, Samuel Z. Arkoff. Wood felt betrayed because he was excluded from the deal. Arkoff did not think highly of Wood's talents, and perhaps understandably so. Later, Wood claimed that Arkoff stole the story for how to make a monster from a script he had submitted. However, this accusation seems exaggerated given the film's generic plot, which didn't require much inspiration. Soon after his breakup with Dolores Fuller, Ed Wood married actress Norma McCarty. McCarty played the role of Eddie, the stewardess in Plan 9 from Outer Space. She was recently divorced with 2 sons from her previous marriage. The marriage surprised Wood's friends. He invited everyone to what they thought was a cast party, but once they were all there, he revealed a wedding cake and a preacher, announcing he was getting married. The marriage ended about a month later when McCarty discovered Wood was a crossdresser. It has been reported that their marriage was annulled, but in fact they neither annulled it nor legally divorced. After the split, Wood temporarily moved in with Paul Marco. The year 1956 was marked by several setbacks for Ed Wood. He began filming The Vampire's Tomb with Bela Lugosi, cast as the vampire, but the project had to be abandoned when Lugosi died of a heart attack. Wood was allegedly one of the last people to see Lugosi alive. Some footage of Lugosi from this film was infamously later used in Plan 9 from Outer Space. Lugosi's death also ended other planned projects, including a TV series called Dr. Acula, the film Dr. Voodoo, which I mentioned earlier was an intended remake of The Black Cat, and the horror western The Phantom Ghoul, aka The Ghoul Goes West. The last project was to star Lugosi, Lon Chaney Jr., John Carradine, Tor Johnson, and either Gene Autry, Bob Steele, or Ken Maynard. Wood intended to write and produce the film, with Harold Daniels directing it. It was planned to be in color and widescreen, but alas, his grand ambitions were thwarted once again. Wood also attempted a teenage action film titled Rock and Roll Hell, but had to abandon it when producer George Weiss withdrew his support. The existing material was sold to actor Conrad Brooks. Wood and Brooks tried to finish the film over the next decade, but it wasn't released until 1993 as part of the anthology film Hellborn, and even then only in fragmentary form. Some segments from Rock and Roll Hell were later included in The Night of the Ghouls and The Sinister Urge. On a more positive note, one of Wood's scripts, Teenage Girl Gang, was turned into a film titled The Violent Years in 1956. Directed by William Morgan and produced by Headliner Productions, the film is an entertainingly silly and exploitative story about a teenage girl gang causing havoc in a small town, committing crimes including rape and murder. Made on a shoestring budget, it features some of Wood's signature dialogue and is worth watching for fans of his work. Interestingly, the plot of The Violent Years bears similarities to Russ Meyer's later girl gang film, Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, though it doesn't quite match Meyer's cult classic. Earlier that year, Ed Wood had met Cathy O'Hara in a bar while he was drinking with Bela Lugosi. O'Hara immediately fell for Wood, and they soon married in Las Vegas. Wood always considered O'Hara his legal wife, despite his first marriage not being legally annulled. One strength of their relationship was O'Hara's acceptance of Wood's transvestism. O'Hara stated that Wood's transvestism was not sexual but a source of maternal comfort, especially from Angora. Even in his later years, Wood would go out in public dressed as his female alter ego, Shirley, a name that appeared in many of his screenplays and stories. He directed many of his later pornographic films in drag, but often didn't bother to shave, which his cast and crew found something of a curious look at the time. Furthermore, Wood always insisted he never had a homosexual relationship and was considered quite the womanizer. He often expressed a wish to be reincarnated as a beautiful blonde woman. O'Hara never got along with Wood's mother, Lillian, whom she described as a strict disciplinarian who had psychologically damaged Wood from early childhood. Wood would sometimes send money to his mother without O'Hara knowing. In late 1956, Wood began filming his script Grave Robbers from Outer Space, which would eventually become his most famous work, Plan 9 from Outer Space. Ostensibly, Plan 9 from Outer Space is about aliens arriving in UFOs who attempt to conquer Earth by raising the dead, specifically 3 corpses played by Vampira, Tor Johnson, and Bela Lugosi/Lugosi's double, Tom Mason. However, the Earthlings fight back and ultimately prevail. Like most of Wood's films, the details of the flimsy and absurd plot get lost in the circus of surreal and bizarre elements that parade across the screen. Like Bride of the Monster, Wood had little perspective on the budget needed for an elaborate science fiction film. The special effects, sets, and costumes reflect this acute lack of resources. The UFO interiors are poorly constructed, and the graveyard set looks painfully fake. The airplane cockpit is represented by a shower curtain, UFOs are depicted using Cadillac hubcaps, and the mothership is a mediocre painting. The alien outfits are laughably bad, and the alien leader is played by the effeminate Bunny Breckenridge. At one point, Criswell, a popular TV psychic of the time, unexpectedly pops out of his coffin. Wood also included scenes of Bela Lugosi shot for the vampire's tomb, which made no sense in the context of Plan 9. Lugosi was supposed to play a vampire, yet there are no vampires in Plan 9. Lugosi was doubled in several scenes by Tom Mason, a chiropractor with no acting experience and who didn't resemble Lugosi at all, and who constantly hid his face behind a cape. Partway through filming, Wood ran out of funds. Miraculously, he found financial backing from the most unlikely of sources, the Baptist Church of Beverly Hills. They agreed to support the project on the condition that everyone in the cast convert to their religion. This led to a mass baptism for the actors in a Beverly Hills swimming pool. Apart from Bela Lugosi, the most recognizable names in the cast were probably Criswell, wrestler Tor Johnson, and Vampira, whose real name was Mila Nurmi. Vampira was a former stage actress, model, and dancer who had an alleged romance with Orson Welles and was almost discovered by Howard Hawks. But it seems being almost discovered was good enough for Ed Wood to be deeply impressed. She gained fame hosting the Vampira show on ABC in 1954. After her show ended, her Hollywood career struggled, and by 1956 she was willing to work with Wood. Despite being considered one of Wood's most iconic collaborators, she actually only appeared in Plan 9 from Outer Space, and later spoke negatively about the whole experience. Plan 9 from Outer Space was previewed in 1957, but it wasn't until 1959 that Wood secured distribution for the film. During this time, he stayed busy. In 1957, he directed The Final Curtain, a 20-minute pilot for a horror anthology series called Portraits in Terror. The series never materialized. The lead role in The Final Curtain was meant for Bela Lugosi, who read the script on his deathbed. After Lugosi's death, the role went to Duke Moore. In 1958, Wood directed his next feature, The Night of the Ghouls. This strange horror story centers on a fake spiritualist who uses tricks and special effects to stage seances and extort money from wealthy clients. However, he accidentally raises the real dead, who seek revenge on him. Duke Moore plays the cop, Tor Johnson reprises his role as the monstrous strongman Lobo, Valda Hansen channels the absent Vampira, and veteran actor Johnny Carpenter plays the chief of police. Criswell once again emerges from his coffin, and Paul Marco returns as Kelton the cop. Fans generally do not hold The Night of the Ghouls in as high regard as Glen or Glenda, Bride of the Monster, or Plan 9 from Outer Space. This might be due to the absence of a big name like Bela Lugosi, or because it is more competently made and lacks the glaring technical errors of Wood's other films. Its story is also not as over the top. However, judged on its own, The Night of the Ghouls, produced by Wood's short-lived company, Atomic Productions, is a lot of fun. It's packed with classic horror clichés such as ghosts, the dead rising, seances, and skeletons. Serious horror fans might not find much value in it, but for those who approach it with a sense of humor, it is an entertaining watch. This time, it's hard to tell if you're laughing at the film or with it. In 1958, another one of Ed Wood's screenplays, The Bride and the Beast, was made into a film directed by Adrian Weiss. Produced by Allied Artists, the successor to Monogram, it was the largest company Wood worked with during his lifetime. This meant a higher budget and a more polished look compared to Wood's usual films. The stock footage used actually fits the film's context, and it even features two real tigers interacting with the actors, or more likely, their stunt doubles. The plot of The Bride and the Beast is classic Ed Wood. It follows a woman named Carlotta Austin who feels a strange attraction to her husband's pet ape. Under hypnosis, she regresses to a former life where she discovers she was once an ape. Her husband, Lance Fuller, then foolishly takes her to Africa for their honeymoon. While he hunts two escaped tigers, Carlotta is reclaimed by the gorillas. The rest of the 1950s brought nothing but misfortune for Wood. He attempted to launch several projects, but none came to fruition. In fact, he did not make another film until The Sinister Urge in 1961. This film aimed to be a hard-hitting exposé on the smut industry, mainly nude photographers. Despite its sensationalist premise, the movie turned out to be a rather dull, third-rate crime drama. To add some spice, Wood included a relatively explicit rape scene after the film had already been released in some areas. The film's straightforward approach did not mesh well with Wood's penchant for pulp fiction, sci-fi, and horror, making it one of his less remarkable efforts. Even with elements like a cross-dressing cop and characters rambling about loosely related topics, trademarks of Wood's style, the film failed to leave a mark in either his filmography or the history of exploitation cinema. In 1962, Wood worked as a script doctor for Married Too Young, directed by George Moskoff, for Headliner Productions, the same company that produced The Sinister Urge. However, by the early 1960s, Wood's film career was effectively over. Several projects he conceived during that time never materialized, including Ghouls of the Moon, a sort of sequel to Plan 9 from Outer Space that was to use more unused footage of Bela Lugosi, The Peeper, a sequel to The Sinister Urge, and Attack of the Giant Salami, a science fiction spoof intended to star veteran comedian Joe E. Brown, horror icon Boris Karloff, and Valda Hansen from The Night of the Ghouls. Ultimately, The Sinister Urge was his only directorial effort of the 1960s outside the adult film genre. Out of necessity, Wood began writing pulp novels, usually on the sleazier side of the genre. He quickly proved himself to be a prolific and skilled author for hire. His novels, often cheap sex and crime stories, displayed a personal touch. They frequently dealt with themes of transvestism, the fear of homosexuality, and of course Angora sweaters, often with a hint of horror or the macabre. Some of his racier titles included Raped in the Grass, Sex Shrouds and Caskets, The Sexecutives, Forced Entry, and Death of a Transvestite Hooker. Occasionally, Wood also wrote nonfiction books, which were often just as sleazy as his fiction. In 1967, Wood was surprised to learn he had fathered a child out of wedlock after World War II with a young woman he dated while in the Marines. According to Conrad Brooks, Wood and his wife Kathy met this woman, also named Kathy, in 1967 when she was already 21 years old. Born on May 23, 1946, she had been living in Lancaster, California, and had managed to trace her father's whereabouts. Wood's mother, Lillian, said she had been contacted by the girl in 1963, who sent her a photo and introduced herself as Lillian's granddaughter. Lillian sent the girl a wax for her graduation in 1964, but never heard back. There is a photo of the young woman in Rudolph Gray's biography of Wood. She visited the Woods and stayed at their house for a couple of days, but tension soon arose. On the second day, Kathy physically threw her out of the house after finding her sleeping on their sofa. Kathy insisted, "She's not your daughter. That bitch lied to you. The father could have been anyone. There's only her accusation." Kathy Wood never believed the girl was Ed's daughter, stating in an interview, "There was never any proof, only the woman's statement on a birth certificate." Ed told Kathy that the woman he had been with in 1946 regularly slept with 10 or 20 other Marines at the base, so he doubted he was the father. On the other hand, actress Valda Hansen recalled, "I met Ed's daughter at his house in the valley. She looked just like him. Beautiful, delicate, green eyes, dark chocolate brown hair. She was very sweet." Art director Bob Durtino, who worked with Wood on Orgy of the Dead, mentioned that Wood later traveled to attend his daughter's wedding in New York, and was eventually told that he had become a grandfather. Two of his adult films from the late 1960s deserve special mention. The first is screenwriter Wood's sexy caveman spoof 1 Million AC/DC, directed by Ed DePriest, from 1969. This film humorously parodies genre movies like 1 Million Years BC. Despite being mostly an excuse to show naked women, it is occasionally quite funny. The second notable film is Love Feast / Pretty Models, All in a Row / The Photographer, also from 1969, this time directed by Joseph F. Robertson. Wood not only wrote this film but also played the lead role of a photographer who invites a stream of models to his house. Eventually, the models turn the tables on him, forcing him to participate in their fetishistic fantasies, which, surprise, surprise, include wearing women's shoes and a baby doll nightie. Although Wood looks miserable in the film, with his face scarred by chronic alcoholism and his body in poor shape, this does suit his role as a pathetic sleazeball. In 1970, Ed Wood returned to directing, but the B-movie world had changed significantly. The sexual revolution had taken place, leading producers to focus on sex cinema and hardcore pornography rather than the more cautious and timid adult films of the 60s. Consequently, Wood's last films, including Take It Out and Trade, Necromania, The Only House, and Nympho Cycler, were all sexploitation films. Necromania was released in both softcore and hardcore versions, while The Young Marrieds, his last feature film as writer-director, was entirely hardcore. Although these films were still pretty strange, they lacked the outrageousness of Wood's 1950s work. It's tempting to think what a pornographic film with a full Plan 9 vibe would have been like, but by this stage, Wood was already creatively broken, and the old enthusiasm was worn out by relentless failures and struggles. Life during the 1970s was harsh for Ed Wood. He and his wife Kathy faced continuous financial troubles. Wood's alcoholism worsened and his bouts of depression became more frequent. The couple was evicted from one apartment after another, often able to take only what they could carry. For the last few years of his life, Wood relied almost entirely on writing pornography novels to make a living. He earned between $700 to $1,000 per novel, which he would quickly spend on alcohol. Friends noted that in his final years, Wood stopped bathing, and his apartment became so filthy that he refused visitors to avoid showing them the squalor he lived in. Paul Marco recounted how Wood would lament, "My God, I'd given everything away. I should be a millionaire. I should have $1 million right now. Their final apartment was in a high-crime area at the corner of Yucca and Cahuenga in Hollywood, surrounded by drug addicts, gamblers, and prostitutes. Wood, who often pawned his typewriters for cash, was mugged regularly on his way to the liquor store. Eventually, he arranged for his paychecks to be sent directly to the liquor store owners to avoid carrying cash. The couple's apartment was constantly under threat of burglary. One night, a transvestite was beaten to death in the hallway outside their door, and gunshots were a nightly occurrence. Friends reported that Wood and his wife often became violent when they drank. Stories circulated about their physical altercations, with Wood sometimes knocking Kathy unconscious. Criswell once commented, "I always had the feeling that one would kill the other, and if you were there, the killer would say you did it." Despite these tumultuous times, Kathy professed her love for Wood years after his death. Throughout his struggles, Wood never gave up on his dream of being a respected film director. From the early 1960s onwards, he worked on a script titled I Awoke Early the Day I Died. This tongue-in-cheek film without dialogue, never Wood's strong suit, follows a madman escaping an asylum in women's clothes, encountering one macabre situation after another, until he falls into an open grave and breaks his neck. Unfortunately, the film was never produced during Wood's lifetime. Around noon on Sunday, December 10, 1978, Wood felt ill and went to lie down. From the bedroom, he asked Kathy for a drink, which she refused. A few minutes later, he called out, "Kathy, I can't breathe." She ignored him, tired of his demands. After hearing no movement for 20 minutes, Kathy sent a friend to check on Wood, who found him dead from a heart attack. Kathy later recalled, "I still remember when I went into that room that afternoon and he was dead. His eyes and mouth were wide open. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. He clutched at the sheets. It looked like he'd seen hell." Wood was cremated at the Utter McKinley mortuary, and his ashes were scattered at sea. His makeshift memorial service was held at Peter Coe's apartment, attended by Paul Marco, Kathy, David Demering, and Criswell. At the time of Ed Wood's death, his name and career had become so obscure that most local Los Angeles newspapers, including the entertainment magazine Variety, did not bother to run an obituary for him. What made his death even more tragic was that his rediscovery was just around the corner. In 1979, David Lynch's Eraserhead suddenly began gaining attention after spending 2 years on the midnight movie circuit, a path well trodden by Ed Wood. Lynch made no secret of his admiration for Wood, and even borrowed soundtrack elements from Glen or Glenda for Eraserhead. Then in 1980, Michael and Harry Medved celebrated Wood's Plan 9 from Outer Space as the worst movie of all time, with Wood also winning the title of Worst Director in their book, The Golden Turkey Awards. This publication did not condemn Wood's films to oblivion. Instead, it sparked new interest in his work. Suddenly, his films were being shown again at film festivals and theaters. With the rise of home video in the early to mid-1980s, distributors were eager to release his films to the public. This interest was revived in the late 1990s and early 2000s when DVDs became popular. Unlike during his lifetime, interest in Ed Wood's work grew after his death. This renewed attention led to the publication of the definitive book on Wood, Nightmare of Ecstasy, The Life and Art of Edward D. Wood, Jr., by Rudolph Gray, in 1992. In 1994, Tim Burton directed a big-budget film about Wood's life, focusing on his relationship with Bela Lugosi. The film, Ed Wood, starred Johnny Depp and won 2 Oscars. Who would have thought during Wood's lifetime that he would ever be associated with the Academy Awards? Wood's real triumph came in 1998 when his ambitious magnum opus, I Awoke Early the Day I Died, was made into a film by Iris Eliopoulos. The film, starring Billy Zane, paid loving homage to Wood. All of this demonstrates how alive Ed Wood's legacy is, even decades after his death. He remains loved not only by fans of bad movies, but also by a broader audience. He is surely the best-known B-movie filmmaker of all time. While many more technically skilled directors have faded into obscurity, Ed Wood lives on as a truly relentless do-it-yourself pioneer in the movie industry. That's about all from this episode. Let us know in a comment what you think of Ed Wood's films. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for our weekly videos right here on YouTube. Sweet dreams.